Hi, this is Kathy with Barefoot Mountain School of Herbs, and in this video we are going to talk about how to identify, process, and use Japanese barberry. The information presented in this video is intended for educational purposes only and is not meant to give any medical advice, diagnose, treat, or cure any disease. Please do your own research and prayerfully make your own decisions regarding your use of herbal medicines. Now, Japanese barberry is an invasive perennial shrub that grows in almost any environment. You can find it in the woods, in meadows, just almost anywhere that it has a chance to plant itself, it will grow. It is similar to the common barberry, which back in the day was wiped out. They found that it was bringing a blight to the corn harvest, so they waged war against it and they won. So most of the time you will not find a common barberry, but you can find Japanese barberry very easily. Japanese barberry is one of the berberines, which is a very important group of plants, including golden seal, Oregon grape, and mahonia. Now, berberine is the yellow, very important constituent in a few herbs, like I said before, including golden seal, mahonia, and Oregon grapefruit. It is antimicrobial, especially antibacterial. It's especially effective against gram-positive bacteria like streptococcus and staphylococcus. So, we might use berberine against strep throat or some MRSA skin infections and that sort of thing. Berberine is very bitter and astringent, so it's great for gastrointestinal issues, gallbladder issues, liver, etc. It's also shown in studies to be anti-inflammatory, and it's found in some studies to possibly lower blood sugar and mitigate insulin resistance in type 2 diabetics. I did read one study in particular where they compared it to metformin, and it worked just as well as metformin in the type 2 diabetics. So we're going to talk a little bit about identifying Japanese barberry, and the picture on this page is a picture of a very early spring Japanese barberry bush. And early spring is a really good time to find it because it blooms and turns green earlier than most other shrubs in the woods. So they stand out. So they're kind of easy to find in the spring. So it's a good time if you want to try to identify one to go in the woods to look for one. Now the leaves on a barberry range from green to deep red depending on how much sun they get. They are rounded or almost teardrop shaped with smooth edges, and they just kind of look like they're piled on top of each other. They look very crowded along the stem. And as you can see, along the stem, they have very wicked thorns, long, rough thorns. The stem itself is usually rough and lined, so you can see the ribs there. And again, over here, you can see some of the ridges in the stem. So the stems are pretty rough, and the thorns are very long. The berries are oval. You can't see on this, but they have a black spot on the end of them. And of course here, here's another example of the teardrop shaped leaves with the smooth edges. And this is not a very good picture, but you can see this is a root of a barberry plant, and you can see the yellow berberine in the root. I've scratched a little bit of it back here so that you can see that. Now, I don't know of any poisonous lookalikes of the Japanese barberry. Common barberry might be found in the place of Japanese barberry. So if you find one that matches the description of Japanese barberry but has a few toothed edges, you might have found common barberry. But otherwise, the biggest lookalike that I have found is wild rose. So we're going to compare those two. Of course, Japanese barberry, we have the smooth leaves. The leaves look piled on top of each other, and the leaves are also thicker than wild rose leaves. The thorns, of course, are heavier. You saw a picture of those, and it has the yellow inner bark when you scratch the lower stems and roots. Whereas wild rose has the finely serrated leaves. They are arranged neatly opposite each other. They don't have this messy piled on top of each other look. The leaves are thinner when you rub them between your fingers. They do have thorns, but they're finer and not as long, and the inner bark, of course, is not yellow. It will be light or cream colored. So now we're going to talk a little bit about processing Japanese barberry. And the picture on this page is some barberry roots that have already been processed. The bark and the inner bark has been scraped off, and you can see how yellow they still are. Okay, so when you're harvesting Japanese barberry to make a tincture, in the woods you want to lop off as many of those thorny upper stems as possible before you even start digging the root, because they will get you. So I just lop those off, get those out of the way. You dig up the root and you just keep the lower stems attached to it. You want to, like I said, harvest the lower stems and the roots. Remove the outer bark if you can. If it's a smaller bush, you might just want to leave the outer bark. Sometimes you'll just lose more of the inner bark than it's worth. But if you can remove the outer bark, just go ahead and do that. And then you want to scrape off the yellow inner bark, like you see in the picture here. And then you want to take those scrapings and weigh them and put it in a jar. You want to use half pure grain alcohol like Everclear with half spring water or distilled water. You want to use a 1:4 ratio. So if you have an ounce of those scrapings, you would want to use 4 ounces of liquid, which is going to be a combination of the alcohol and the spring water. For a folk tincture, just put it in a jar and cover it with vodka by about an inch. And then you want to shake your jar every day for 6 weeks. And after 6 weeks, you want to thoroughly press out the Japanese barberry root and then strain it through a coffee filter. Put it in a bottle and label it. So if you want to make some Japanese barberry oil, after pressing out the barberry root, you can use the leftover marc to make an infused oil. Just take, what's left in your, where you pressed it out, the leftover bark, place it in a jar and cover it with olive oil. Let it sit in a warm place for a couple of weeks, shaking daily, and strain it. Then you let it sit for a few hours until any water and sediment settles to the bottom, and you pour the good infused oil from the top. You can do that a couple of times just to get all the water and sediment out, because that will make it go rancid quicker. You can use this oil to make antibacterial and anti-inflammatory salves or rubs. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about using Japanese barberry. Okay, first of all, even though it's a wonderful antibiotic herb, Japanese barberry, and like all berberines, so that includes golden seal and the rest of them, they do not readily assimilate into the bloodstream. They do get into the bloodstream a little bit, but not as strongly as some of the systemic antibiotic herbs. So you have to put the herbal medicine where it needs to go. For example, if you have strep throat or a throat infection, then you would make it into a gargle. You'd add a little bit of tincture to some water and gargle that. Eye infection, you would use an eye wash or eye drops. So you would use sterile saline with a little bit of, maybe 4 or 5 drops to an ounce to make eye drops. You can use straight tincture as an ear drop. Like if you have an ear infection, you can just put a drop of barberry drops into your ear, a drop or two, 3 or 4 times a day, and it works wonders. For vaginal infections, you would make a douche. For wounds, an infected wound, you would make a wound wash. You just have to put it where it needs to go, and it's much more efficient that way. An exception to this rule is for lung or sinus infections. Berberine seems to metabolize through the lungs, so just like garlic, when you eat garlic, no matter what you do, you still smell it on your breath because it metabolizes through the lungs. Berberine is the same way. So you can take that by mouth, and it will be effective for lung issues and sinus infections. Also, for digestive issues or urinary tract infections, you can just take it by mouth because it passes through your digestive system and your urinary system as a normal part of digestion. Okay, and that is the end of the video on Japanese Barberry. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to like and share. And if you should have any questions, just put them in the comments. Thank you for watching and have a great day, and God bless you.